Hello, and welcome back. For today's podcast, we're joined by Robbie Still from Kent Wildlife Trust, who's speaking with us about the more technical side of conservation and some of the brilliantly innovative ways he and his colleagues are taking on challenges. He covers how the effects of Kent's newly arrived bison will be monitored using remote sensing, tracked using special collars, and how technical advances are creating greater efficiency in storing data. If you like this episode and want to follow more on this project, please follow the links in the description. If you'd like to support us, you can make a donation at restoreourplanet.org or follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Enjoy the conversation. So today I'm joined by Robbie Still from Kent Wildlife Trust, who's going to be talking with us about some of the more technical sides of conservation. So Robbie, welcome.
Hi, yeah, good to be here.
Fantastic. So Robbie, would like to start by telling us a little bit about what your background and what it is that you do.
So yeah, I've got a background in conservation, did a biology and bioscience undergrad and masters, and initially went in very much expecting the same things that I think everyone does, of wanting to go and do data collection in the field, practical conservation work, all of that, just from loving animals and finding it really interesting, but then ended up not particularly enjoying my research project's data collection side anyway, which was kind of just walking around the wood, pulling up Himalayan balsam and seeing how the sort of vegetation community recovered after that. But really enjoyed the data analysis side of it. And so for my master's project, I decided to go fully desk-based, using data that other people had collected, and kind of doing my own thing with that, interpreting it, modeling it. And that kind of got me really interested in the modeling, in the tech, in the kind of data analysis side, more than the practical conservation, which really just brought me down this route. And I got my first job in an environmental record center, which are kind of, they're quite unknown entities really, but they do sort of really, really vital work, collecting, storing and supplying biological data to various organizations, including wildlife trusts, on a county scale. So you get that really kind of little local conservation projects will kind of send their data in, and the record center will get it in the right format and then make sure that ecological consultants, local authorities know what's happening in each area, know what species are there. And that really gave me the skills to get this kind of job at Kent Wildlife Trust, and really kick on sort of the technical side of things.
All right, fantastic. Do you want to tell us a little bit about GIS and remote sensing? Exactly what it is and how it works.
So GIS is Geographic Information Systems, which sounds quite fancy and intimidating, but is really just an Excel spreadsheet with a map attached to it. So you think of each row on a spreadsheet where you've got the dates, the species, whatever you can think of. Imagine all of them also have just like an east and northern coordinate. So it's a point on a map, or they are a polygon on a map, or a line. That's what it is. So it's mapping out information with the data attached to it. So the easiest one to sort of think about is a species record, which will be a point on a map of where that species was seen, or a polygon where the species was seen in an area if you don't have an exact coordinate. And then you've got all of the information attached to that one point, so you can do some really interesting things with that.
All right, and then, go ahead.
Remote sensing is getting that data without actually having to go in the field, or without having to record each point automatically. So that might be from satellites, because we can get some really high quality satellite imagery nowadays, or it might be from drones. So you can fly a drone over a site and then use that sort of photography or that video you've taken to assess the habitat type, get the height of the trees, all of that. So it's kind of shortcuts basically, to reduce the sort of time it takes to get that environmental data.
What kind of information can you get from this type of data gathering?
All sorts, really. It's quite difficult to do on a county scale. There's a lot of conservation in the UK, with wildlife trusts being probably 1 to 3 counties, with record centres being similar, and with sort of organisations, only the RSPB and big national ones really doing things on that scale, and also being a fairly poor industry in that we don't have huge amounts of capital, we don't have huge amounts of money to spend on things. We have to kind of use what other people are doing, like Google have got their sort of satellite imagery. We got to kind of hijack on that. We can't do stuff on our own. So it is quite difficult sometimes to get the resolution of information you need. for like a reserve rather than a whole country. But you can kind of you can estimate habitat type. So you can say whether it's grasslands, woodlands, scrub, but you can also get sort of based on things like the colours of different species, you can say whether because coniferous woodland, if you think about it, is much darker green than broadleafed. So you can kind of get that level of detail. And then if you get the drone out, which is much higher resolution, you can get all sorts of information like on plant health, photosynthetic activity and things like that through kind of multispectral imagery as well as just normal photos. So it's really, really clever and you can do a lot of it, but it just depends on how much time and money you've got to put into it as to how much you can get out, which is the balance we always have to sort of strike as a charity.
Of course. And then once you sort of collected this data, what sort of purposes is it afforded?
Probably primarily for monitoring biodiversity in Kent. So, for example, with the Blean project, we'll be monitoring the bison's effect. We'll be monitoring how the coniferous to deciduous woodland changes, whether there's more broadleaf trees and fewer sort of non-native pine trees in that area. And then as a Kent as a whole, we've got a target of restoring 30% of Kent's sort of land, managing 30% of Kent's land for wildlife. And so obviously we need to track that. We need to know if we are hitting that goal, which is exactly what this sort of technology can do. So we can see how the satellite images have changed over the last 5 years and see if there are more pockets of green space and do what we can to assess the sort of quality of them.
All right, okay. And once you have these sort of images and you can see, for example, as you said, if it's coniferous or broadleaf, different by color or the effects that the bison may or may not be having, is it, so practically speaking, so you've got the map, are you then sort of like just manually drawing rings around certain parts that have changed, or does the drone pick up on it automatically? How exactly is that carried out?
It depends really what you want to do. So for example, with the bison, and Lawrence will be able to talk to this a little bit more, but what we're doing is taking samples in the areas that we know the bison are, in the areas that they aren't, and then we'll compare how those work. So with Blean, we've got the bison in one area, and we've got longhorn cattle in the other as the proxy, and then we've got an area with no grazing in. So we take drone samples in each of those areas and then compare how they change. If the bison area changes more than with the longhorns, we know the bison have a greater effect. And then we can overlay that with the GPS tracking data from their collars to see if the areas where the bison spend more time are even more affected, to sort of see what that correlation is.
Okay, and what are some of the expected or unexpected or hoped for effects that bison are likely or could well bring?
Yeah, so we think, so the Blean is massive area of ancient woodland, but it was a plantation for a long time. Plantations generally plant lots and lots of rows of coniferous trees because they grow quicker than deciduous, which grow very quickly in rows, grow very tall, and then block out all of the light because they never lose their leaves, and just they're more dense with the pine needles compared to sort of deciduous. Think about an oak tree, lots of light can filter through, whereas with a pine tree it can't. And so what we're hoping for is that we've done a lot of clearing already of the sort of non-native species, and we're hoping the bison will come in, they'll continue that work, they'll prevent any more pine trees from sort of popping up because they rub against them, they'll eat the bark, they'll trample them, obviously being a lot bigger than our sort of natural grazers, even though these are natural to the ecosystem, but they haven't been here for 10,000 years. They'll have a greater effect on sort of preventing those trees, and they'll also knock down some of the younger deciduous trees, the native ones. They will still affect those, but what they'll do in that is create clearings where you can get more sunlight in, so they will have different species. We'll have things like fritillary butterfly, which love that sort of habitat coming back, which is a key sort of monitoring project that we're doing. And they'll also be kind of dust bathing, trampling through. They'll just basically cause havoc, which will break up that ecosystem. So it's not just one massive stretch of woodland, it's a nice mosaic of a bit of woodland, some clearings, some dust bar, some sort of dusty, sandy areas, with nice corridors going through, and it just makes it a much more diverse habitat, which will attract loads more animals, and be tons better for our biodiversity than it sort of currently is, and it will definitely better than it was 20 years ago when it was all plantation.
Good stuff. Okay, so would you like to tell me a little bit about bison collars, which you mentioned before we started recording?
Yeah, so we've got some really interesting challenges in the Bleem project, and we've overcome them in a really cool way, I think. But I would say that because I helped do it. So Bleem, infrastructure-wise, even though it's 10 minutes from Canterbury, which is obviously a major city, has similar infrastructure to a rural, remote African reserve. There is no power, there is no mobile signal, no Wi-Fi. It's full of mud when it's wet. It's very difficult to get around. So it's a massive challenge to kind of set up a lot of these things. A lot of the on-the-ground team have dealt with these challenges, such as getting all the fencing in to keep the bison safe and all of that. But what we've had to deal with is the lack of mobile signal and the dense canopy of the trees, meaning that radio waves will not travel because the radio will just get blocked off by a wall of trees. So GPS collars for animals, the GPS will work the same no matter what, but to actually receive the data from the collar, you've got to have a connection to it either through a radio receiver, so it can ping the location coordinates on a sort of frequency, or via like 4G, because then it can send it to a database via the mobile signal. Neither of those are options at Bleem. So we kind of have this, we had this problem of how on earth do we get this data every 20 minutes or every 5 minutes, because we need to know where the bison are at all times, so we know if they do break out, but also so we know where they're spending their time, which can help our management decisions and help us see their effects. So what we've done is we found a company called Smart Parks, who are based in the Netherlands, who specialize in working in these sort of remote African reserves, and have the reason we got in touch with them is because they provided the collars for the Crabslack Bison project, which we kind of worked quite closely with them. We're almost like inspiration, and we learned a lot from, which is a Netherlands-based rewilding project where they've released bison on sort of sand dunes. So firstly, we knew that collars would work on bison because bison are notoriously difficult to collar, because the males especially very rough. They will break the collars with their dust bathing and their sort of where they rub against trees, they'll damage them very easily. And they've got specific sort of biothane collars, which are very strong, but also very light. So you can get a very, very strong collar without actually harming the animal or making them sort of take any more weight around. But the main thing they do is use technology called LoRaWAN, which I had not heard of before, and is essentially long-range, low-power Wi-Fi. So it's like our Wi-Fi, but it can only handle tiny little packets of data. So it's probably like Wi-Fi at my grand's house, for example, in that it can't do anything. But it can work over a very long range. So you have one sort of basically a router, and that will sort of do a good 2-3 kilometers line of sight around. And so we've set up 3 of those at the Bleem, one at our ranger station, one at our partners Wildwood, and then one at one of our kind of outposts, I guess, about a mile away, which kind of covers the south end because it's on a hill and so it can see quite far. And the collars, so it's a closed network, and the collars will ping to those routers across that network. And as it's a sort of closed system, nothing else can get on that. So it's not like using radio where you kind of got, if someone gets your frequency, they can get your data. And we're not using 4G, which means we don't have to pay for SIM cards and things like that. But yeah, it's a really cool system that it's the first time it's ever been used in the UK. And it's kind of groundbreaking, really, which is really exciting for us.
Really exciting. And the data that feeds back is location?
Yeah, it's location, it's time. We can see how close they are to each other. And it will record sort of accelerometer information, which is their XYZ coordinates. So you can kind of try and match that to behaviors. So say we put them on our captive bison, we see this pattern looks like what they do when they dust bathe. We can then match that to what the wild bison are doing. So we can say this is probably when they're dust bathing and see how that affects everything.
Oh, it's really fascinating. Okay, so tell me a little bit more about some of the other things you've got going on. So you mentioned mobile mapping as another little technology.
Yes. So a big area where this is basically my way of getting the sort of field surveyors to like me, because what they have to do is they go out in the fields, they are incredibly skilled at habitat identification, species records. They'll note all that down on a clipboard, and then they have to come back and they have to plug it in a spreadsheet or they'll have to give it to an assistant who'll plug it into a spreadsheet, which doubles the time essentially, because they're out in the field doing this work, and then you have to input the data. And especially with the Bleen, the amount of stuff they're doing is crazy detailed. Like it takes a good 2 hours for Cora, who's our monitoring evidence ecologist, to do I think it's a 2-meter circle. She has to identify every single plant species within that area. And it takes her 2 hours per, and we've got 144 of those across the Bleen. So it's a good 300 hours just on the identification.
Yeah.
And if she has to put all of that into a spreadsheet or a database afterwards, that's a good month of work extra. And it's also very boring work because you're just plugging numbers in. So what we've done is integrated our GIS software with mobile mapping. So you can get an app on your phone, and we can have our GIS projects, which are our mapping projects, come up on the phone. So they can either draw a new point or click on something we've already made for them, and then just fill in a form for sort of, this species is here, this species is not, this is high abundance, the weather was this, and then click sync, and that goes back to our database straight away. So we have that live information, and it means they only have to do it once. They don't have to report back and fill it in and do the boring stuff. And it's also easy to use because then they can see where they are on the map. They don't have to sort of remember a grid reference or anything like that. So it's a lot of pros, and it's been very popular so far.
Fantastic. Okay. And what other kinds of technology could we hope to see in the coming years, or already being used in perhaps another country under a different context that could be here in the coming years?
Yeah, so I think the UK conservation sector is kind of gradually catching up. There's more and more appetite to do this. GIS is a big way of sort of getting people on board, because it's kind of like a gateway into data analysis and data management and these sort of improved practices. The main thing I think is ways like mobile mapping, because there's a lot of other sort of similar things, because there's still a lot of reliance on manually inputting spreadsheets or manually drawing on a map in sort of ecology and conservation in the UK. And that can all be kind of removed either through automatic processes, through remote sensing using satellites to sort of get your field boundaries rather than having to do them yourself, or through mobile mapping. And you only do it once, and you do it when you're in the field, when you can actually see the shape, rather than when you're trying to sort of draw on a map and then try and remember what that shading meant or what that code was. So I think that's the main way, is that we want to kind of see generally improved workflows across the sort of organization, from field surveyor to kind of report writing, because that can all be one process, where if the surveyor is doing the right thing, you click one button, it does all the analysis, does a report for you each year if you do it right. Whereas obviously that takes time to skills to set up. So people mostly will do annual reports or sort of 5-year reports. Every year, 3-5 years, they'll do the same thing, step by step, click buttons. Whereas that could be done all in one go. It could be automatic. You could schedule it, and then schedule it to email the PDF of the report out to your trustees whenever they need it. So you don't even have to have someone thinking about it. But it's getting the space to sort of set that up is the challenge, because we're all so busy. We're working on very low capacity because there's not much money, and we're all trying to save the world, essentially. So what I love about Kent Wildlife Trust is we've got the support from senior management to set these things up and to take a little bit of extra time to do things so we do them right, which means next year and the year after, we barely have to spend any time on them. But the challenge is getting that little bit of time carved out. But the exciting thing is that that's happening more and more, and people are more sensing how useful it is. So we could be looking at a much more efficient sector within 5-10 years, which means everyone's got more time to do the important things of engaging with people, doing the practical conservation, and knowing it works.
And do you think funding is increasing along with that, or is sort of predicted to increase as people begin to see these great benefits?
I think so. There's definitely more fundraising opportunities for technical things. We're seeing them from Natural England. We're seeing them from the lottery. There are specific fundraising schemes for technical advancement and challenges and things like that, which is really promising. The other area more depends on individual leaders of organizations, so chief execs and senior management, and it does vary based on where you are and based on just the personnel you've got. But we're seeing more and more people enthusiastic about this, and I think as hopefully people see Kent really taking a lead and sort of innovating this, we're rather than creating sort of spreadsheets, we're creating apps for people to use as calculators and things like that. Hopefully people see that and catch on and say, this is much better as a marketable product. This is a much easier way of working. We want to try and do a similar thing. That's my sort of hope as trying to do this in my little corner of the country, hoping that it spreads out. And I know there's people doing it in other little corners of the country, and it will just spread and meet in the middle. It is just people led at the moment, and hopefully it'll be strategy led within a couple of years.
Hey, and if someone would like to get involved or sort of, perhaps seek out training to sort of start working in your field or leading up to it, how would they get into it?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and it does depend on universities, because some uni courses are really good. They'll have a good introduction to GIS, introduction to R, which is the coding language that I use, which kind of helps a lot. And then some universities still focus a lot on the kind of using Excel for your statistical analysis and not really looking at maps and anything like that. So if you're listening to it as kind of someone who's looking to do a degree or a master's, have a look at what the university is doing in terms of the modules on offer. Is there a GIS module? Is there a statistical analysis module? Is there sort of a programming language module? Because that's the best way to do it from I'm a biologist, I want to do this work. That's the kind of gateway in. And after that point, it's just the enthusiasm. If you enjoy it, pick it up on your own time within your CV or your cover letter. Maybe do it as a website rather than just as a static Word document or PDF. Try and include some nice maps and things. Make a Twitter account to show off what you're doing. Make a GitHub account to share your code. Things like that is all really good for employers. And there's a huge amount of resources out there, either QGIS or R, which are my two recommendations. Just Google R training course, the letter R, or QGIS training course, and there's loads out there. And just pick it up and try and enjoy it and see how you do. And then we are coming in as a sector at quite a ground level. Most people's experience of this is from statistical analysis rather than actually sort of proper, I guess, workflow analysis and work sort of automation. So if you come in with some enthusiasm with these ideas, you don't need a full 2-year training course in GIS or anything. You just need a couple of weeks looking at this thing, a couple of months of just playing with it on your own time, and then show that enthusiasm and you can really make a difference.
Fantastic. And Robbie, where can people follow you, find out about the remote sensing and what you're doing down in Kent and Bling?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn as Robbie Still, and you'll see me as Kent Wildlife Trust Digital Transformation Officer. I'm on Twitter as DataRobbie1, and I've got my own blog, which I haven't updated in a good year and a half. But if you want to have a look at what I used to do, it's called robbiestats.com, and it looks at women's football, ecology, all sorts of cool things that you could sort of apply data analysis to.
Fantastic. Robbie, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.